On the 19th of September, 2005, Basra looked calm only from a distance. The city had been presented as the quieter British sector of Iraq, the place where soft berets, foot patrols, and local partnerships were supposed to prove that occupation could be managed with restraint. But beneath that surface, Iraq's second city was changing hands street by street. Police stations were no longer simply police stations. Some were government buildings by day and militia pressure points by night. Saddam Hussein's regime was gone, but its collapse had not produced order. It had opened a vacuum. That morning, 2 undercover British soldiers were operating inside the city in civilian dress. Their mission was not a battlefield raid, not a visible patrol, and not the kind of clean special forces operation that looks simple on a map. It was surveillance, quiet intelligence work, the dangerous middle ground between soldiering and espionage. They were watching people inside the Iraqi security structure itself because by 2005, some of the men meant to secure Basra were suspected of serving other loyalties. Then the mission broke open. At an Iraqi police checkpoint, the 2 men were stopped. Within minutes, a confrontation had turned into gunfire. Iraqi police officers were hit. The British vehicle was pursued. The 2 operators were seized, beaten, photographed, and taken to the Al-Jamit police station. Their faces soon appeared on television, bruised and exposed, while crowds gathered outside and the city began to ignite around them. For London, this was a political crisis. For British commanders in Basra, it was an operational emergency. But for the men inside Britain's Special Forces community, it was something colder and more immediate. 2 of their own were now in the hands of a police force that British officials believed had been infiltrated by illegal militia groups. Negotiations began, but the situation did not stabilize. It deteriorated. The question was no longer whether Basra was slipping out of British control. That answer was already visible in the streets. The real question was whether 2 captured British operators would survive long enough for anyone to reach them. What made the crisis more dangerous was not only that 2 British soldiers had been captured. It was where they had been taken, and who might now control the room around them. Basra in 2005 was no longer a city where uniforms guaranteed loyalty. The Iraqi police force had been rebuilt after the fall of Saddam, but rebuilding a police force on paper was not the same as controlling it in the streets. In parts of the city, police stations were penetrated by militia influence, local political rivalries, and armed groups that understood the value of using state authority as cover. That was the nightmare British commanders now faced. If the 2 soldiers remained in official custody, there was still a channel for negotiation. If they were transferred into militia hands, the situation changed completely. Then this would no longer be a dispute between allies inside a fragile occupation. It would become a hostage crisis, with 2 exposed special operators held by men who might see their capture as propaganda, revenge, or leverage. The British response began cautiously. Senior officers tried to use Iraqi legal and political channels. The demand was simple: release the 2 men. But the hours passed, the atmosphere outside the station worsened, and British commanders received information suggesting the captives had been moved or were about to be moved. In a city where crowds could gather quickly and armed groups could disappear into dense neighborhoods even faster, time was not a neutral factor. Every delay increased the risk. Outside the police station, British armored vehicles moved into position. This was not the image London wanted from southern Iraq. The British Army had spent years presenting its Basra mission as different from the American experience farther north. Less aggressive, more locally connected, more restrained. Now British troops were preparing to use armor against a police facility belonging to the very Iraqi state they were supposed to support. But restraint has limits when intelligence says captured soldiers may be slipping beyond reach. The decision was made to force the issue. Armored vehicles breached the wall of the compound. Troops went in expecting to find the 2 men inside. Instead, they discovered something more troubling. The captives were no longer where they were supposed to be. And that meant the rescue had just moved from a political crisis into a race through Basra's shadows. Outside the police station, the situation was moving faster than the politics could control. A British patrol could surround a building. A commander could demand the release of 2 detained men. and diplomats could argue that the arrest had no legal basis. But none of that solved the central problem. The longer the two operators remained in hostile custody, the more likely they were to disappear into a second location, beyond official denial, beyond paperwork, beyond any guarantee that they would be seen alive again. Basra was not Fallujah. It did not look like a city in open rebellion. That was what made it dangerous. The threat was layered inside ministries, police units, local factions, and armed groups that could switch from uniformed authority to militia power without changing buildings. The British had spent years trying to work through Iraqi institutions. Now one of those institutions had become the obstacle. The first breach was physical. British armored vehicles pushed through the perimeter of the compound, smashing into a place that was supposed to represent the new Iraqi state. In military terms, it was a rescue action. In political terms, it was explosive. Cameras caught the chaos. Iraqi officials condemned the raid. Crowds reacted with fury. British troops were attacked in the streets, and the image of burning armored vehicles in Basra traveled far beyond the city itself. But inside the operation, none of that mattered as much as one fact. The two soldiers were not in the cells. That discovery changed the rhythm of the night. If the men had been moved, then the police station had only been the first layer of the trap. The rescue force now had to follow intelligence quickly, through a city where every minute increased the odds of execution, concealment, or transfer. This was where conventional pressure and special operations instinct met. The armor could break walls. The larger force could dominate streets. But finding two captured men after they had been moved required speed, local intelligence, and the ability to act before the political consequences caught up. British forces searched nearby buildings connected to the police compound. What they found confirmed the fear that had driven the decision to act. The two men were recovered alive, reportedly from a house close to the station, after being removed from official custody. They had been beaten, exposed, and used as leverage in a city where the line between police and militia had almost vanished. The rescue succeeded, but success did not make the operation clean. It revealed something worse. Basra's security system was no longer fully under the control of the government Britain was trying to support. That was the deeper wound left by the raid. The recovery of the two men prevented a possible hostage disaster, but it also exposed how fragile Britain's position in southern Iraq had become. A coalition force can survive ambushes, roadside bombs, and hostile crowds if it understands who the enemy is. Basra was more difficult because the enemy was no longer standing clearly outside the system. In some places, it was wearing the system's uniform. For British commanders, this was the lesson hidden inside the rescue. The issue was not simply that two undercover soldiers had been compromised. The issue was that a police station, built into the framework of the new Iraq, had become unsafe ground for British personnel. That meant the strategy of partnership was colliding with the reality of infiltration. Every checkpoint, every police headquarters, every local unit now carried a question that could not be answered by rank badges or official papers alone. Who did these men really obey? The political damage came quickly. Iraqi officials condemned the British action as a violation of sovereignty. Images of British armor smashing through a compound wall gave critics exactly what they needed. To many Iraqis, it looked like an occupying army humiliating local authority. To British officers on the ground, it looked like the only remaining option before two captured men were moved beyond reach. Both views mattered because both shaped what Basra became afterward. The city did not return to the quieter model Britain had once hoped to present. Relations with local institutions deteriorated. Armed groups became bolder. British patrols faced increasing hostility, and the idea that Basra could be managed mainly through soft presence and local cooperation began to lose credibility. The rescue had succeeded tactically, but strategically it showed that control was thinner than official language suggested. That is what makes the operation so revealing. It was not a large battle. It did not involve divisions, air campaigns, or months of planning. It was a compressed crisis inside one city, built around two captured men and a decision that had to be made before the system failed completely. Yet inside that crisis was the entire problem of post-invasion Iraq. the gap between institutions created on paper and power exercised in the streets. The men were alive. The mission had worked. But Basra had shown its real face. The aftermath reached far beyond the walls of the police station. In London, the official defense was straightforward. Commanders had acted to protect life. On the ground, the reality was harsher. British authority in Basra had survived the night, but its legitimacy had been damaged in public view. The rescue had shown strength, yet it had also shown desperation. It proved that Britain could still use force when required, but it also proved that force was now being used against parts of the very security structure Britain had helped rebuild. For the soldiers in southern Iraq, that contradiction mattered. Counterinsurgency depends on trust, or at least on a working relationship with local institutions. After Basra, that trust became harder to sustain. If police officers could detain undercover British personnel, if captured soldiers could be handed toward militia custody, if a station could become a holding point for armed political influence, then every joint operation carried hidden risk. The British were not only dealing with insurgents outside the wire. They were also dealing with contested loyalty inside the wire. This is why the rescue remains important. It was not just a dramatic special forces recovery. It was a warning shot about the direction of the Iraq campaign. The fall of Saddam had removed one dictatorship, but it had not created a stable monopoly of force. In Basra, power was being redistributed among parties, militias, police commanders, religious networks, and criminal groups. Some of them competed with one another. Some overlapped. Some wore official uniforms during the day and answered to different chains of command after dark. The British model in the South had been built around a lighter footprint than the American approach. It relied on local engagement, negotiation, and the belief that Basra could be transitioned gradually into Iraqi hands. But the incident exposed the weakness in that theory. A city can appear calm while authority underneath it is fracturing. Patrols may move through streets without open battle, yet intelligence networks, police stations, and detention rooms may already be contested spaces. The rescue of the two men prevented a killing or a hostage spectacle. But it could not rescue the larger strategy from the truth Basra had revealed. British forces could still win a sudden tactical crisis. They could still break through a wall, locate their men, and bring them out alive. What they could not easily do was rebuild political control in a city where the lines between ally, rival, and enemy had become dangerously blurred. In the end, the Basra rescue was remembered less for its scale than for what it exposed. 2 captured British operators were brought out alive, but the city around them had changed. The most dangerous battlefield was not always a desert road or an insurgent safe house. Sometimes it was a police station flying the flag of the new Iraq, guarded by men whose loyalties could not be trusted. For the SAS, the lesson was direct. Intelligence work in Iraq had become inseparable from survival. A surveillance mission could turn into a firefight in seconds. A detention could become a militia handover. A local security partner could become the threat. For Britain, the operation became part of a wider reckoning in Basra. The southern strategy depended on local forces taking control, but this rescue showed that control and stability were not the same thing. A police force existed. A government existed. But armed power still moved through militias, factions, and compromised institutions. That is why this operation still matters. It was a tactical success inside strategic uncertainty. The men were saved, but the deeper problem remained. Britain could break through a wall and recover its soldiers. What it could not easily do was restore trust in a city where ally, rival, and enemy had begun to overlap. The secret operation achieved its purpose. 2 captured men came home alive, but Basra had revealed the truth beneath the surface. The war after Saddam was not only being fought against remnants of the old regime. It was being fought inside the institutions meant to replace it. If you found this story valuable, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more military history stories where the real operation was far more complicated than the official version ever admitted.